Well, welcome everyone to the first Labor Studies seminar of the year and the first in-person seminar in more than 2 years. It's really nice to be back. We've got a good audience online. It's nice to see some familiar faces there as well. And for those of you online, we have real people sitting in front of us as well. So this is a truly blended event. So thanks for you guys for coming in person as well. For those who don't know you, my name is Mike Rogan. I'm one of the original members of the Neil Hackett Labor Studies unit.
People in the waiting room.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Sorry, we're just managing people in the waiting room as well. Before the pandemic, we had one of the largest seminar series, if not the largest, on campus. So we're pretty pleased to be able to be back in business. We started in 2013 and 2014 with the seminar series, and in the last several years, we've had generous funding and support from the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, FES. So we'd like to acknowledge their supports. They've been working with us again this year on our Labor Studies seminar series, as well as the winter school. And we'll say more about that at the end. But today we're very honored and pleased that one of our colleagues, David Fryer, one of the original members of the Labor Studies unit as well, has agreed to kick us off on relatively short notice, I must admit. So we thank him for that. He's presenting a paper on behalf of himself and several colleagues, at least one, or I think perhaps even two of whom are joining us on Zoom as well. It's a rather appropriate topic. It's quite close to home. They'll be presenting some research on one of the Rhodes University Community Engagement initiatives, which has particular relevance to those of us who live and work here at the university. The format will be the same as it's been in the past. We'll ask David and perhaps his co-authors to speak for about 40 to 45 minutes, and then we'll open it up to questions. And we'll find some way to take questions from the Zoom audience as well. Perhaps people can comment in the comment box and raise your hands, and we'll try and get a mix of in-person and online comments and questions. So with that, thank you, David. Looking forward to your remarks, and I'll tell you when your 45 minutes is up.
I think Claire is going to go first.
Oh, is she? Sorry. Great. Claire?
Okay, you're mute.
Two years of pandemic, and I never seem to recognize when I'm on mute. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Claire McCann, and I am David Fryer's master's student. But I also work part-time in the Rhodes University Community Engagement Division, specifically focused on research into projects like 9/10. And today I'm going to be orientating this research in terms of what we do at community engagement. I'm going to get us started off with 3 quotes. And the first I'm going to get us started off with 3 quotes. And the first quote is on the screen. It asks, should development in South Africa be understood as the process of attacking evils like malnutrition, disease, slums, crime and violence, illiteracy, unemployment, inequality, racial hostility, inadequate provisioning of housing, the undemocratic political system, etc.? And if so, the important question arises, can this be achieved without the active involvement of ordinary people in affected communities? Can it be left to politicians alone? This quote reminds me of the words of Julius Nyerere, who said, if real development is to take place, the people have to be involved. He says, you cannot develop people, you must allow people to develop themselves. And finally, In our National Development Plan, it states that a developmental state builds the capabilities of people to improve their own lives while intervening to correct historical inequality. Neither governments nor the markets can develop necessary capabilities on their own. Communities are indeed important in our development and our transformation. At Rhodes University, our liberation is fundamentally tied up with that of our Makanda community. There is a recognition that communities are important in higher education. The Higher Education White Paper number 3 positions community engagement as a mandate for higher education institutions, although this mandate is in reality unfunded. But in this mandate is a recognition that community engagement or university community partnerships in teaching, learning, and research hold the potential to transform apartheid universities and higher education in general. This is because community engagement can play a role in making higher education institutions more responsive and relevant to their contexts. It can potentially aid universities in producing civically minded graduates capable of tackling the complex challenges of the post-apartheid world and the 3 wicked problems of unemployment, inequality, and poverty. And hopefully, it can orientate universities towards the public good. Community engagement is thus positioned as a core function of the university alongside teaching, learning, and research. At Rhodes University, community engagement takes the forms of engaged research, engaged citizenship, previously known as volunteering, and service learning. And these are attempts to embed community engagement in our teaching, learning, and research. It is based on the recognition that community engagement should be infused throughout higher education, rather than seen as an add-on, an extracurricular, or a nice to have. And one of our key initiatives is the Vice Chancellor's Education Initiative. The Vice Chancellor's Education Initiative, or the VC initiative, launched in 2015, was largely a response to dysfunctional basic education in Makanda, which was identified then as one of the root causes of youth unemployment and inequality, both in Makanda and beyond. It stems from the observation that for middle-class Black learners at fee-paying schools in Makanda, about 3 out of 4 students had a chance of exiting the system with a good quality matric and be able to enter a top university, so about 75%. But if we looked at the same learners at our non-fee schools in Makanda, we saw that there was a less than 1 out of 10 chance of learners passing at the same level and getting into a top university and then into the labor market. In 2012, there were only 9 enrollments at university from these no-fee schools. And during that period as well, our Makanda pass rate overall was hovering at around 60%. So while people often think of Makanda as the educational hub of the Eastern Cape with its top university, its top private schools, certainly at that time, it was one of the worst performing districts in the province and seemed to typify dysfunctional education. These statistics look very bleak for Makanda, but also for Rhodes University as well, because it shows that the university is not accessible to its community and not relevant to the lives of those in Makanda. The Vice Chancellor's Initiative is therefore not just about tackling unemployment and inequality, but it also exists to position Rhodes University, not just in Makanda, as our Vice Chancellor says, but for and also of Makanda. It is a recognition that the sustainability of Rhodes University rests on it becoming more accessible to the community. The Vice Chancellor's Initiative comprises of a whole host of programs from the beginning stages of learning to university preparation programs. From ECD to community education and science, I'm sure quite a few of us have seen the mobile science lab around town, to partnerships with parents, to school leadership initiatives, to skills development in terms of chess, information technology, music for learners, and much, much more. And the pilot project of the Vice Chancellor's Initiative is 9/10, which of course is the one that we have been talking about for a few years now after it won the McCann Prize last year. 9/10 stems from the saying that 9/10 of education is encouragement. It is a mentoring program that pairs matric learners from select no-fee schools in McCann with Rhodes University volunteers in mentoring relationships. These relationships provide one-on-one support throughout the matric year in 9 guided contact sessions, with the aim to prepare matric learners to cope with their final year of school and pass to their full potential. 9/10 is not tutoring, but it's about mentoring, about developing things like study skills and summaries, goal setting, applying for university and applying for NSFAS, and about career orientation. In that way, encouraging learners to pass to their full potential. 9/10 as a model is also about building on the assets of community partners. It is a multi-stakeholder approach between the Rhodes University Community Engagement Division, Gadra Education, and the partner schools. Each of these stakeholders brings important things to the table. Gadra Education, a well-known NGO in McCann, brings a wealth of experience in the basic education sector and partnerships with the schools. It is the main liaison. Rhodes University Community Engagement brings the critical mass of student volunteers in the coordination of the program. And the schools bring their physical assets, as most of these contact sessions happen at the schools themselves, and as well as teacher coordinators. All of these people have a specific role to play, and it is these assets, as well as the connectivity and social capital between these partners, that I believe is the key strength of the innovation. McCann has enjoyed some great statistical and educational success since the inception of 9/10. So we've had our pass rate increasing to 83% at the end of last year, which is higher than the national average, than our provincial average, and also higher than the provincial average of the Western Cape. And we've seen the numbers of learners from no-fee schools entering and enrolling at Rhodes increasing 6-fold in the same period. Of course, we cannot attribute all of this to 9/10, and this is what this research is about, but it does seem that McCann seems to be starting to make a turnaround in education. 9/10 is also a learning model. So the first few years were about tweaking, refining, and pragmatically adjusting the model to maximize outcomes. During this period, we were able to incorporate additional schools. So at the beginning, 9/10 started with 2 schools and then 3 schools, Nombulelo, Nsika, and Mary Waters. And then in 2020, Kutliso Daniels also joined the program. So we're now targeting 4 out of the 6 no-fee schools. And then COVID happened in 2020 after Kutliso Daniels joined, and we had to again start and rethink the model entirely. We had to delve into what virtual mentoring looked like, and we had to stare the digital divide straight in the face and try to come up with ways that data and Wi-Fi could get to the mentees or the learners in the program so that mentoring sessions could continue. This was a very difficult time, but it was also a time of possibility, as it showed us that perhaps 9/10 can be done beyond our own context. And it showed us ways that we could potentially scale the model to other universities and other spaces. And we are beginning to do this now. 2021 also saw the beginning of a research component added to 9/10, and this seminar, in fact, came out of a research group that I coordinated last year, which was a whole bunch of honors students, which each investigated various aspects of the 9/10 program. This research group is important because it shows us how we can make Rhodes University, not just in McCann, but also of and for McCann. It starts to embed initiatives and community engagement within the academic process, within our research. And hopefully this is a way of starting to bring the university close to the community and orientating our research towards social change from within our own context. This research has been really important in giving us insights as to the program's successes and improvements that need to be made. And the work today that we're going to hear in terms of whether 9/10 closes or bridges the gap between university and community provides key insight into what needs to be done to unlock the developmental potential of university community partnerships. And so now is a very fitting time to hand over to the researchers themselves.
Thanks, everyone. Sorry about the rather clunky continuity there. You did an advert or something, didn't we? So I'm going to move on to talking about the evidence that this is actually Kenneth Chiridza's project, honors project from last year. And we were hoping to actually continue it this year, but we had fewer honors students taking this up. So it's quite a small piece, and I'll talk about that. Then I'll talk about, drawing some deeper ideas about how this connects to economic development. So the first thing is, and Claire already mentioned this, right? The pass rates, right? The most spectacular effect, although talking to people, they say we don't really know that this is the effect of 9/10, is that not only have the pass rates gone up, but they've arrested a trend downwards in Grahamstown. So we can see here that the bachelor's passes, right? That's really interesting. And these are the schools. There's a nice article in the Grey Cots done by Ashley Westaway, and it's got lots of statistics. Not only the pass rates, but the dropout rates. It's quite interesting. The dropout rates have dropped below 50%. So we're getting a lot of students going through the schooling system and getting through to matric, and then either getting an ordinary pass or a bachelor's pass. And of course, that doesn't allow you to get into university. But if you look at the setup in Grahamstown, there are the 9/10, which mentors matrics, isn't the only aspect. There's also the Gudra school, and then there's an initiative at Rhodes where they can register as part-time students while they upgrade their results. Because a bachelor's pass isn't enough to get into degrees. You have to have the right points. Okay, so some caution, because in the COVID period there was upward adjustment of the results. We're not sure what that is. And also there's questions about the sustainability of these improvements. All of the people we spoke to say, the situation in schools is quite, if you have a good head and then the head moves, or it's very, very insecure. Yeah? And we're seeing that the effects in Grahamstown, in McCann, of the budget squeezes, right, and inefficiency. So the end of March, no textbooks delivered, failing to fill teaching posts, basic education budget in real terms has shrunk by quite a large amount. So we're seeing this, it's very difficult. You're almost seeing a local initiative, but the state is squeezing the sector at the same time. They've squeezed, and the Eastern Cape especially, the allocation per learner has been squeezed, this nominal allocation. Okay, so the effect per learner is, I can't see because Claire's face is not, but I think it's 13% in real terms, the drop in government spending per learner, right? So, as I said, you can't attribute this to 9/10. So what, thanks Kenneth and Claire managed to gather data from the Department of Education. It's quite a feat. And it's did a regression analysis with 9/10 as one of the variables. And you can see that the effect of being in 9/10 is strongly statistically significant, positive, right? And interestingly, teacher-learner ratio isn't, right? Which suggests, very interestingly, right? It's suggestive that the resources are not as decisive as the other stuff that happens at school. So you can, to be a cliche, you can have a learning underneath a pine tree, right? And if you've got a good teacher and enthusiastic, or you can have a nice big classroom and nothing happens. Right? So the intangibles in education, the 9/10ths, are what is important. Yeah? But, okay, so this is a very small study. Only 54 observations, which means 9 schools, 6 years. 3 of those schools are fee-paying schools, so they, we really should look at, we should include those in the sample. The other thing that's a problem is that both learner-teacher ratios and even 9/10ths are endogenous, right? The learner-teacher thing, students go to the better schools. So you'll see smaller, it's not always a good indicator of quality. The better schools will have more students enrolling. The worse schools will have vacancies, right? So it's not a, we need to tease that more. 9/10ths itself, cherry picks, right? It's the best schools. So we can't say it's because of 9/10ths or because 9/10ths chooses the best schools, right? So we need to dig a bit more into that. And there's room for that. There's a lot of room. Another thing, the pass rate. Let's look at the pass rate. What we need to do is look at the bachelor's. We need to look at whether students are accessing university, right? So there's what you can do statistically. There's the potential to look at that, for example, bachelor's pass rate is more sophisticated econometrics. But, right, there's only so much you can do with the quants. Right? So what Kenneth also did is he did interviews, right? And only 3, but with somebody representing each of the key stakeholders. Headmaster, somebody in GADRA, and somebody in Rhodes University Community Engagement. And so what we're getting from this is that what are the effects on, right? Well, enrolled learners. That's what the stats was telling us about, right? Only about half of the learners in matric in a school in the program are in 9/10ths. So you're cherry picking the best. So the qualitative evidence is that those students benefit enormously, right? So what, anecdotal, this is what people are saying, right? It's testimony. But they're saying the students not only benefit from getting good study skills, learning how to apply for university, but they benefit when they get to university, right? Because they've got good study skills. So you're not tutoring sub-content here. It's something that we need to learn at Rhodes, that we don't pay enough attention to teaching and learning, right? We pay far too much attention to curriculum. Our students don't know about what they do in 9/10ths, as they say you must make your own textbook. What is the pedagogy? And that pedagogy isn't about content, it's about what remains after you've been to school. Okay. But outside of that, we've got the teachers and the rest of the learners in the same grade who are not part of the program, right? Remember, 9/10ths can only reach a few students. And we'll talk about why you're cherry picking. Why are you taking the best students? Why aren't you going for the weaker students, right? But the evidence again about teachers from the particular teacher, head that we interviewed, overwhelmingly enthusiastic. Okay? He actually said something like, if money was rain, I wish it would rain on Rhodes University so that they can make more programs like this. He said maybe we can have a 7/8, so we can go down and look at grade 7s, because grade 7s are arriving without the necessary ability, right? What with the teachers? The evidence is that it depends, right? It depends on the school. There's no standardization at schools, at these schools. How it works is quite haphazard. In the good school, right, the teachers are taking this on and using it to teach, right? And of course, it's not just the matrics, it's also the grade 11s, right? You get this, okay? But then what about earlier? This is where it gets interesting. What about a spill back to earlier grades? What about schools outside who are not currently in the program? Well, the evidence suggests with other schools want to join. That's what the evidence is. But the whole thing about partnership with when you have limited resources is you have to be quite careful in the approach. You don't want to have something that doesn't work. Okay? That's a very important point I'll come back to. So when the schools that have joined, right, were joined because they were deemed to be ready to join, right? Earlier grades, now this is where we started to see, okay, this is not what we focus on. This is the 19th, we're imagining that younger scholars are looking up and seeing, okay, hey, right, I can see it, maybe there's a path. And we can imagine that, but we don't have any evidence of it, right? There's no clear evidence that, you know, grade 9s or especially further down, right? But when we look at the community, we don't have a clear, I think the distinction here is people are not, they don't know about 9/10, right? But they know that Rhodes is doing something, right? That people, what all of the respondents, all said, Rhodes' reputation has improved dramatically. The sense of that ivory tower on the hill, you know, has diminished. People feel that it's accessible. That if people, you know, people with abilities, obviously it's still hard, but you're not going to get blocked. Okay. Now, the other thing, so the Rhodes University is there's nothing up there. Okay. I'll talk a bit more about that, the Rhodes University link, because you can see the community, bringing the community and Rhodes University together. It's not just about the word uplifting the community, it's also about Rhodes becoming more part of the community. Policy, well, that's a problem. Why is the Department of Education not taking this on? That's what people were saying. It's working, why not? Why do they always seem to be reinventing the wheel every year? Other universities, we've already seen the Mangosuthu University of Technology is doing this, right? As I think Claire mentioned, it can only work if you have a university that's close to the community, or you think about IT. Okay, so that's the I think, very positive. And the sample maybe isn't, we should be asking people in the community, but very positive. Yeah? And not just about the enrolled learners, that's the point. Yeah? Okay, so let's just take a step back now and try and conceptualize this a bit, right? And essentially there are 2 points that this 9/10 story, right? This is a quote from America. And essentially the bottom line here is that the problem with fixing neighborhood schools is that bad neighborhoods produce bad schools. That's the problem. And often interventions can make it worse. So in America, the programs to get kids into better schools, then the kids move out of those schools and they get worse, and the teachers don't want to teach them. And bad schools are a very important part of ghetto formation as well. Right? So you could look at that, but in South Africa, right, we would think then that we're saying, look, it's a negative thing. Yeah? All of these things are pushing down on us, entrenched inequality in the townships, lack of resources, lack of a capable state. Okay. But then the other side of it, right, is when we look at South Africa, the factors that drive school performance, yes, resources are very important, inputs. You know, we have educational production function. But there's a kind of almost a puzzle that the correlation isn't that strong. So it's the other factors that are so important. There's so much variation, and it's obviously about school-specific factors, right? You happen to have a good head, right? that sort of thing. But happen to have shouldn't be the case. So that should be something we can work on. Okay. So essentially what you've got is two sort of stories, right? A kind of structuralist, negative, lack of access to resources, vicious interlocking cycles. And I'll talk a bit more about that. But on the other hand, you have the idea, Anatole France, 9/10 of education is motivation. And I'll talk a bit more about this. Now, this is starting to get a bit, try and get that thing to go away. It'll just come back, won't it? Maybe if I do that, no, is that okay? Or is that still sharing?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. No, it's all up at once, but I'll just talk through it. That quote I said about vicious interlocking cycles is from Alfred Hirschman, a very famous development economist, right? And it captures the sense of hopelessness that underdeveloped communities have, right? At first, we were discouraged by that long list of resources and circumstances whose presence has been shown to be needed for economic development. We can't do this, we don't have money, we don't have all of these things, right? Okay, so it's held back by a series of interlocking vicious cycles. And in South Africa, post-apartheid South Africa, this is what it looks like. Yeah? So at the top of the pyramid, we have a labor market where, what? Over here, 1 in 10, I don't know what the figure is, right? Are going to get into a middle class job. I don't even know if I'm just cherry picking. But the numbers of people who end up marginal or long-term unemployed, right? So the demand, and what we look at then is the feedback effect of that, link 1 here, right? The effect of returns on investment in human capital. Most important people in education are the families themselves. Is there any incentive to put the effort in, or the teachers, right? If you are educating people for unemployment and working in the township in the 2000s, we did surveys. People, what are your kids going to be? They're going to be domestic workers, right? Nobody says a lawyer or anything like that. I think things have changed now. But the impact on the schools of demotivation, right? And the impact on social capital. So economists look at the returns to education, right? And if the returns don't exist, there's no incentive for people to invest in education. Okay. Then the other interesting link we have here is the structure of poverty and inequality, right? What determines your educational outcomes? Whether you go to Kingswood or St. Andrews, right? Or whether you go to a no-fee school, and that's determined by your community. So bad communities, bad schools. So these factors impact on what we call human capital formation, right? The quality of school. It's not just about policy, it's about the context. These things are embedded in a vicious cycle. It's self-enforcing. Right, the lack of skilled people means that there aren't businesses in Grahamstown, right? It feeds back there, right? Okay. The lack of demand in the township means that the informal sector is weak. You go up there, there's no city centre, there's nothing, right? So it's a vicious cycle. But notice here what Hirschman then says. Once development has started, the cycle is likely to become an upward spiral, as all the prerequisites and conditions for development are brought into being. So development is endogenous. It has to get going. What you need is a binding agent, something. There's so much talk in community engagement circles about social capital, right? About something to bind and to get to form a nucleus around which development can occur, right? So when we look at this now, when we look at the education pipeline here, this is so clear, right? You start off early childhood, primary, secondary, and then you hit this huge barrier. which is into university. And it's a simplification, but if you want to get into the middle class in South Africa, you have to go to university, or I've got a question mark next to TVET, right? But otherwise, you not employed, not in education, not right, and then you end up as the working poor, the marginalized, the long-term unemployed, right? So unblocking this, it's not just helping these people bridge the gap. It's unblocking this signal all the way down the system. Eh? And this is what was working so well, not just with 9/10, but with the, what the university does with the foundation program, letting people not wait, such small things as waiving the entry fee, the Gadra school, so that there's a pathway. You've unblocked this. And notice that what NSFAS has done, so this is something we have to disentangle as well. NSFAS has taken this away to a large extent. Again, going back into the 2000s, people would say, what's stopping you from, you've got your matric, why don't you proceed? Money. There was no funding. Eh? So NSFAS has unblocked that, but it hasn't unblocked you need a certain number of points. Okay, so we can see here that what we might call the bridgeheads, right? Really important bridgeheads. And these are two that seem to be so critical and which have been emphasized. It is this transition, right? But also the early childhood one. And when you talk to practitioners in early childhood, why are they doing early childhood? Because they've started off with other things and they've realized it's too late. Huh? So this whole education pipeline is being looked at by community engagement. It's quite an interesting, and it's a very appropriate intervention. And notice the efficiency in terms of resources, right? I'll talk a tiny bit more about this, but essentially what you want the government to be doing the heavy lifting. You're not funding schools. Eh? It's the motivation that is much better if it's coming from local, community-based things than if you're trying to have a kind of style in the schooling system with curriculum, right? If you're trying to do quality of school, right? You're trying to improve the quality of school by imposing standardized tests every year, like they have in the States, or quality frameworks where teachers don't have any autonomy. There are many cautionary tales about that. Okay, so moving on to basically the last slide. So what is the role of civil society and the state then? So we have to think about it. And I think before we even think about this, we have to say local economic development is it, right? So when you hear about people saying job creation, they're saying, oh, we must get the plastics industry started or some labor-intensive industry. I think that's the wrong way of looking at it, right? I think if we get the townships working, if we get schools working, schools employ a lot of people, right? Health services, that's where the jobs are, right? And that's where you can fix the communities. So focusing local, right? Local development and local agency, okay? And the universities are potentially I had V, but I took it out, a binding agent. Eh? The kinds of approach the universities, because the universities are obviously, right, what the universities is good at is research and teaching and knowledge dissemination. And they're good at, in fact, they're good at dissemination. Universities are not silos. They tend to communicate with each other. Eh? So the kinds of very interesting interventions we see, the sort of ABCD approach, asset-based community, where you, rather than a needs-based approach, you're not saying what is the most needy person in the township. That's the government's heavy duty, you've got to do something about that, welfare. But what is the person who's got capacity and just needs a little bit of assistance, right? You can help there. Intelligent people who are stuck because they can't get into university. You can unplug that. Eh? So it's also been described as appreciative analysis, trying to appreciate the strengths in the community and work with those and build those. And I think emphasized at Rhodes is the building trust. And we want to build relationships that work. And these take a long time. So small, starting small is beautiful in this case. And when we look at the Constitution, we're looking at the progressive realization of rights. The other thing that the universities do is they have an explicit emphasis on ethics, which is very important when you're dealing with potentially very unequal power relations, right? And what community engagement is bringing in is a kind of focus on community-based research and community-based learning. Universities needing to adopt their own pedagogies, I talked about that, and cultures to make the university feel more like it's a local place rather than an elite. You don't want to lose the identity of a university. It's graduation, wearing a funny gown, weird hat that costs $1,000, right? But you do want it to feel that that's integrated into what is Eastern Cape culture. So the small bridgeheads, but I think reading about this literature, NGOs, this idea of a theory of change, which is when you have a sense of where you're going. You're not just building a bridge and building it, and then it falls down and building it again. You should, as a university, have a sense of how these things are contributing to development. But you're not kind of stuck in this, oh, we're not getting every child in, therefore we're bad, right? We've got a sense of a progressive realization, and that it's better to have people learning under the proverbial tree and getting out of that than sticking to and saying, no, everybody must be in the classroom with IT and everything like that. So this side, it's quite a nice, this idea of, the links, social economy and community engagement and all of those things, right? And here, again, the role of the state is not to do what local communities and business and families, right? Those three pillars need to be enhanced. The role of the state is to do the heavy lifting, right? The resource, and in South Africa, unfortunately, the opposite happens. The state tries to regulate, it tries to say you must do this, and it doesn't fund it. But we see that over and over again. Okay, now, just so to sum up then, to conclude, the South African education system in South Africa is kind of South Africa in a microcosm. We've got a sense that it's not quite in an irreversible downward spiral. That we've got goodwill, there's potential, but that something needs to be done quite soon. And I always ask my students, the question is, what do you think of the state of South Africa? And that's, half of them say it's in a downward spiral, not half, but lots. Others say something has to be done urgently now. We need to shift from a country that's in a perpetual crisis management mode. And crisis management isn't managing the causes of the crisis. It's trying to dampen down the symptoms. To greater proactivity. And so in that setting, how do we assess initiatives like 19th? Well, we mustn't criticize them for starting small and cherry picking the best students and helping the best students, right? Because we can see there's a theory of change in that. It's not just that, there's a possibility of it leading to greater development. Right. So one of the respondents, I know that the word empowerment is a bit sometimes overused, but said that programs like 19th cannot empower people, but they can open up opportunities for people to empower themselves. That's the model. And we need to think about this Rhodes ecosystem approach. I think is very nice, right? And the value of an intervention like 19th is that it is part of such an ecosystem. It's not an isolated form of community engagement. Right, thank you.
To kind of help coordinate the questions online, and maybe between the two of us, we could make this go a little bit more smoothly. So we have about 10 or 15 minutes. I think it would be nice if we could get a balance of questions from in the room as well as online. I think people are welcome to raise their Zoom hands, that little yellow reaction button, or to type their question in the chat, and then between us we'll keep an eye on the chat. So let's try and take questions in rounds of 3, either in person or online. Kenneth is joined. Yeah, I saw him pop in. Kenneth, we welcome any remarks or thoughts from you as well. Having been a part of this paper. Yeah. Great. The question block is just right behind you there. Good. Anything from here? We've got one question in the front. Go ahead.
Me?
Yeah, please. Maybe if you wouldn't mind just introducing yourself as well.
Okay, I'm Luca. You see, the issue of education is really a serious issue, you know. I'll give you an example about the sort of intervention I had, you know, in high school. You see, in Limpopo, there are many rural areas, I mean, and schools, obviously. So there was, Anglo had this intervention where it came to schools and then took the cream of the crops, taught them extra classes for physics and maths. That was good. I mean, I couldn't be here if I didn't enroll in that program. But what I want to say is this, that you see, class is a very pernicious disease in our country. We can tiptoe around it, try to ameliorate the issue, but it's the stuff that we have to really like get to. The state, we can say the state has this role, that role, but the guys at the top are not gonna really do what we want to do as the people on the ground, you see. So we have to really think of the problem of education as also a class problem. The reason why we don't have as many skilled people in the country, it's a class, it's a historical class problem. I was talking to my brother earlier, and I told him that, you see, with us intellectuals in these higher educations, we are in a very nice position. We don't feel exploitation. You know, we think of it. It's not like a tragedy that the mine worker feels. So our position insofar as class interest is very like influenced by the fact that we are very comfortable. You see my point? We are very confident. So when you think of the issue of like what happens with this intervention in the what you call in the townships, for example, it's a good thing. We can complain and critique and do that stuff, but we have to appreciate like something like RUCE, you know, being done. And this example that I'm giving you in terms of my high school education. But this is my point, that it's not this integration we are speaking of, it's not possible because of the class structure. And for Flyers' sake, it's not a negative structural analysis, it's the fact. You see, Rhodes is on this side, the township is there. If you live there, best believe the first time you come, or sometimes when you come to campus, you feel that this is not my place. How can you really feel welcome here? Everybody speaks this advanced English, you know, you are not part of the community. But, you know, students can go there for some few hours and engage with these kids, you know, it should be appreciated. But essentially, a few will just escape that situation like me. A few of us will escape the situation. And also, having had to put a whole lot of like effort into this, because I'll give you an example about the basic education issue. You see, by grade 10, when this program intervened, this Anglo program intervened, I started to realize how far back I was, you see. So they give you this manual and you realize, I don't know nothing about calculus. And then in South Africa, we have this thing where we give kids to do what you call math literacy. What's the point of that? Then we come here and then we measure this, what you call progress in terms of pass rates. But it's poor pass rates, essentially. You only know math literacy. You see my point? Then the issue of the cycle comes back, where in the labor market, we don't have progress insofar as having people that can be skilled and develop industries in our country, instead of asking all the time to the West and China, for example. You see my point? So my question is how is it that the university can bridge this class difference? Because integration is not possible, like I said. How is the university going to escape the fact that there's this structural issue in place? And also you got other powers in the community. You still have the municipalities doing whatever they're doing, you know? I mean, today we still have the issue of like water in Grahamstown. I mean, come on. At this advanced like stage of the capitalist system, we still have issues of water supply when we have, sending things into space. Do you see what class does? You see?
Can we, yeah, thanks. Good series of questions.
Just the short answer is that the universities can't do that. They can do a lot, but the heavy lifting is the state. I mean, the state can't, universities can't do anything about the distribution of income. They can't redistribute it. They can't put infrastructure in the townships. They can't fix the swamps, right? They can make students from bad schools have more of a chance, which can contribute somewhat, but it's not, you're quite right. It's not going to address very rapidly anything like what you talked about this huge gap between the university and the people. And the people in Grahamstown East are at least close to a university, and they're close to a university that's showing, I think Rhodes is probably, for its size, punching well above its weight. Most people are nowhere near a university, so they can't, so I think, but yeah, the short answer is the state isn't doing its thing, right? And it's hard for civil society, but civil society nevertheless can do a lot. My point about ideology, I think I agree with you that we shouldn't necessarily be against corporate social investment, right? We just need to look at things on the face. If that's helping, it's good. But is it coordinated? That's the problem. Should we ask?
Great. So just two things. Please, if you're online and would like to submit a question, feel free to pop it in the comment box or raise your hand. And Claire and Kenneth, if at any point you'd like to chip in and answer a question, just raise your hand there. I'm keeping an eye on you guys as well. Claire's right on it. Great. Just unmute yourself there, Claire. Thanks.
Yeah, got the unmute button this time. I think I just wanted to pick up on one thing that was said in the previous question around coming to Rhodes University and not feeling like one belongs, because that actually came up in some of the other research by the other honours students who looked at learners who came through 9/10s and were successful in 9/10s, later went on to Rhodes University, and kind of feelings of belonging and who belongs to an institution like Rhodes University. And I was quite struck by the comment that integration is not possible. And I think I would like to use that to raise a point of reflection for the university itself and for the people here who all work with the university. I mean, we need to look very deeply at who we are researching, who we're involving as collaborators in our research, the way we frame our communities in research, how we teach, how we bring the Makanda community in our teaching and learning, and who feels like they belong to Rhodes University, because of course the university demographic is changing, and after apartheid we don't want to just target students who come from privileged middle class backgrounds. We want the university to become a space for South Africans, and so that's a really important point of reflection for the university in terms of making it a space of belonging for the people it should belong to today.
Thanks, Claire. Great. Any questions online or in the room? Otherwise, I'll be tempted to abuse my position as the chair. Did you see something, John?
Howard looks like he was to Howard.
Howard, are you formulating a question here? No. Now he's wondering why we're talking about it. Good. Well, if you don't mind, I'll ask a question. This might actually be for the audience as well. I was just wondering how flexible the theory of change might be to what we were maybe thinking of as the ecosystem. And I wasn't thinking so much in terms of the sort of structural and economic and class divides that we've been speaking about, but some of the dysfunction in the tertiary ecosystem. So ideally, we have a balance between university, TVETs, and now adult education. But Rhodes is operating in an ecosystem where two of those three pillars are not very functional, both in terms of their objectives as well as their engagement with the community. So, and some of this isn't an issue for South Africa as a whole. There's a broader issue in most societies about how to put TVET on an equal footing to sort of say there's nothing wrong with a vocational education. It's a legitimate career path, but the signal we get in the labor market, we put a question mark there next to TVET. I think we don't even need that question mark due to some of the recent history we've had with the role of TVET. So how adaptable would this be if Rhodes wasn't being asked to do quite so much within its ecosystem? It's kind of propping up the other pieces of that ecosystem. Would something like this and its theory of change look quite different if the ecosystem is functioning properly? And we could look at those divisions between those three branches of tertiary education somewhat differently.
I think the idea of the theory of change is firstly to not write more than you can chew, but to have a manageable set of goals. And I wonder, for me, I would have to think hard about how that horizontal or trying to. It's very hard to change the mindset in schools that the university is the first prize, right? Maybe they're obviously occupations that are good, like obviously the trades, right? Electricians and plumbers, they can do very well. But I'm not sure how that's one of the things that's almost hard for a university to engage on, because we don't have a technical stream within the university. What do you think?
Things that come to the ecosystem's perspective itself and a theory of change, but what you mentioned, what I'm not asking questions about, which is looking at Rhodes University, we're looking at higher education institutions. But the very nature of a university education is to create the class differences. And that's the first thing. The very nature of it. That's what it was set up for. We need to start asking about what is the purpose of higher education itself, and how is the system functioning in South Africa? So if you use an ecosystem's perspective, then at every level of that ecosystem, from the micro to the macro, you'll have to start asking serious questions about how do they perpetuate all of these differences. It's not just class, it's race, class, gender, right? So the very nature of our education system needs to be questioned, and you can actually do that with the ecosystem theory to bring about the change. Not change, it's actually transformation, which is required. We need to look at this caterpillar changing into a butterfly, but it's just too much for us right now. We can't handle that. So we look at all these little pieces that we can work with to see how do we bring about this little bit of change. That's all we can manage right now. And while we are doing that, we mustn't forget the bigger picture and start asking questions about this bigger picture, about the structure. I mean, who creates these structures? They're not out there in the nebulous cloud. We actually create these structures. If we create them, we can dismantle them. So these are some of the things we should be talking about, doing little things that's required, it's necessary. The 9-10 program has given so many students the opportunity to make a difference in their lives. It's little, but so many students have been given the opportunity to make a difference. Now, why are we doing that? Let's ask questions about the bigger picture. These are all the small parts. In the ecosystems theory, the sum of the parts are not greater than the whole. The whole is actually everything. So I think from a community engagement perspective, if people want to look at some of the short courses that's being offered, there is a short course that DIE offers on higher education and community engagement. And one of the things we asked there is, what is the purpose of higher education? And COVID has shown us a lot has been written through the university world about reimagining higher education. So we have to ask big picture questions while we are handling things at the grassroots, at the ground level, at the microsystems level. So for me, they're not separate issues. You can't. Everything in life is connected to everything else. And you can't. We ask separate questions because we cannot imagine how we handle this big picture conundrum structurally. But we cannot not do that. It's possible, but you have to have this mass thinking differently about how we do it.
Something that I was thinking about is the role of universities in activism as well. So the universities can be engaged in policy activism, engaging with the state. We see this critiquing the state in particular, or maybe pushing the state in certain directions hard, right? Like the Institute of Economic Justice is pushing the state, right? But also to empower, the right kinds of activism in the community, right? And just, I think when the question when you asked me that, my mindset was just community engagement, right? But that's dangerous, isn't it? We get stuck in, well, we're doing this, so we can't do that. But the value of something being embedded in the university, that to me, that is what it is, as opposed to being embedded in the state or embedded in the private sector, where we're also challenging the values of the university, which should be transformed. And I think Rhodes is gradually transforming. Maybe I'm too optimistic.
You see, community engagement is the nexus between learning, teaching, and research. So if that is properly understood, then every discipline in the university can actually be working collaboratively. That is another issue. You get all these separate disciplines. They're so compartmentalized. It's only now there's some interdisciplinary work and research being done. So focusing on community engagement is not a dangerous issue. It is a starting point to look at the relationship between teaching, learning and teaching, and research, and the broader pictures, because the rationale for the introduction of community engagement was for universities to actually contribute to the social and economic development of communities. And that is not just done in a vacuum. You have to ask critical questions about what does it mean for the university to be developmental, and what does a developmental state mean? So this relationship between the state and the university, but where is it done? Which, you see that the structure of the university being in different disciplines doesn't allow it. So the introduction of community engagement as a core function, that is a nexus, can be used as a starting point. So it allows for this critical kind of discussion and for different disciplines to come together.
Great. So let me just do another check to see if there are any questions from the online group. I've got a hand from Esther. Esther, go ahead. But just before you speak, could I just mention to the audience that if you'd like to be a part of our mailing list to find out about the next seminars and the schedule for the rest of the year, please just put your email address in the comment box and we'll add you to our list. But Esther, over to you.
Okay, thank you so much. That was a very informative presentation. I just want to take us back to the community engagement seminar that was held in October last year, which really was one of the most thought-provoking seminars that I've been to. It was actually a conference, 2.5, 3 days. And the conference opened with the question, we need to be asking not what universities are good at, but what universities are good for. And I think that that is a question that we at Rhodes haven't really asked. Because I think by and large, Rhodes sees itself as a research-intensive university. And so the promotion of research, the promotion of publications and having a standing in the global university community seems to be quite an important goal for Rhodes as well as other historically white universities. But since we are located in the place where we are in Makanda, I think Rhodes is trying under the leadership of Dai to make community engagement much more a central part of what the university does. But it's nearly not enough without the university itself shifting its own perceptions of what more it could be doing. For example, the Department of Basic Education in the Eastern Cape returned a whopping sum of 205 million rand unspent. Now, is Rhodes University going to sit quietly and see and say, well, you know, this is how the departments work? Or is there anything we can do at all to put pressure on both provincial and the national government to make use of this money to do things that could be done for schooling? Many positions in schools are lying empty. They've not been filled. Now, given the high level of demotivation, the sort of crisis fighting mode that we are in, and the absolute poverty, hunger, and starvation of people in the townships, we cannot be expecting them to fight these battles. In fact, the state does not trust its communities. If you take the issue of the basic income grant, there are many universities like WITS and University of Joburg that actually have policy units like the Institute for Economic Justice and other bodies who have been fighting for increasing the 350 Rand disaster fund and asking for a basic income grant. Now imagine that if this money of 205 million could be given to communities that are in severe distress, and that the university plays a role in pushing for this. And why cannot we be doing this? Because we have people who are outspoken, who understand the economics, who understand what kind of state we are in, who understand the liberal economic frameworks within which we work, to try and recover this money. Now this money has gone back to the national budget, and we don't know what's going to be done with it. So I think there's an important role for the university to play in setting up units that actually make a government accountable for its failures. The whole of last year, books were not supplied to universities, learners' workbooks, which are crucial, especially in a situation where there's no face-to-face teaching. So I think more than thinking about, interdisciplinary research or doing away with different disciplines, we've got to have a role in which a university can put pressure on government, can make government accountable, can fight corruption. We've got to stop seeing ourselves as just people who are making knowledge and contributing and disseminating knowledge, but as people also who can act as a very powerful pressure group on government. So I would like to get the response of David on such an issue. Thank you.
Just do one final round.
Yeah.
So you go. Any other questions, either online or in the room? Got one back there. Nothing online that I can see. So let's take this question, and then maybe I can ask David, Claire, and Kenneth if they have final remarks and to address those questions as well.
Sure. Thank you so much. I just want to find out, as much as you've mentioned like the role of the state as well as the university, and in terms of like obligation of who is working how in the process of this 19th program, in an African context, it's an issue of, we say that it takes a community to obviously build, a child, to raise a child, to push someone forward. But I understand that in terms of costs, yes, there's the government, obviously they have their own portfolio of how they handle it. And then there's also the university. And the university's chosen to step into the program, but just to ask about things like in the program, just to find out, are there issues where instead of, it's a program where students are to mentor younger people who are coming up into the academic system and in general society. But these people that are these young South Africans that are being raised, and especially in McCann, in this space, an issue where I just want to find out how is there a linkage between the actual community that those people are brought up in. For example, they go back to a household every day. They go back to a certain community. They go back to a certain space. So this obviously is something that interlocks and feeds into the whole process of grooming and placing a person into a certain sense. So now with like indigenous knowledge and all these things that exist, where I feel sometimes there's a research bias where we come in as researchers, we ask questions about a community and then we leave. And then you think this is the best way that I can step out of this, and this is what I think is the best target with getting it done. But now when it goes back to actually finding out what the program has done in terms of holding on to that Indigenous knowledge, it can get messy, yes, with more stakeholders and more parties involved, but just to see in that the sense of that community, just to follow up in terms of the community itself. And
Great, thanks. Like that the last word or the first of the last?
I don't know.
Yeah. Claire, do you want to come in first, and then we'll go to Kenneth and then David? Does that work?
Sure, that's fine. I think the first question, am I correct in saying that it was asked for David? So I'll leave you to go for that one first. Perhaps you want to answer it now. Would you like me to go into the second one?
Carry on.
Okay, so I think I'm going to just comment on the second one because I think it raises really important points around how we do research. And I'm really interested in the fact that, we started this labor study seminar, and now we've come to this really key question from the last 2 comments, or even 3 comments, which is around looking at what the role of higher education actually is at the moment, and how do we orientate higher education towards the public good? How do we orientate our research towards social change? I really hope these conversations continue beyond this seminar because they are so important. And I really enjoyed hearing what the last person had to say about how we do research. I think a lot of the time researchers sit and they conceptualize questions without even consulting the community that they want to do research on. And I think if we want to move towards a decolonized transformative approach where we embed communities in our university and in our research, we need these voices as collaborators from the very start. So from research conceptualization stages to choice of methodology, to data analysis, to data dissemination, I think that is really significant. And I think we need to start looking at the way we do research in all disciplines, from traditional humanities disciplines that are generally associated with this, to economics, which we both currently reside, to other disciplines, to see how we can really orientate our research as a way that brings the Makanda community into the university rather than it feeling like a completely separate space where people in Makanda might not feel they belong.
Thanks. Kenneth, are you able to hear us and interested in saying a few words or answering any of the questions? Perhaps not much ago, David, and I think he's able to,
Yeah,
might not have a good connection.
Well, thanks for all the questions. And I think your one is very important. How does, what does the community get from it, right? Because having the most talented people in the community moving out and become middle class, it's one of the, that we can't help that, right? That's what people are in matric to do. But the fact that the communities are themselves undeveloped and have no opportunities, you can't blame the helping the kids to get out of that community. But nevertheless, right, that's how transformation has happened in South Africa. It's been a one-way street. People have moved them into the middle class, and the residual communities have stagnated, and we know what Grahamstown East looks like, right? So that's a critique. What can we do about it? It's actually fairly obvious what we can do about it, but who is going to do it? And that's where the problem is. And that, I think, addresses Esther's point as well. I mean, the capacity of Rhodes University to do these things, right? The university itself, we have to recognize the university is embedded in a certain structure, the governance of the university. It does want to be on the top 100 list, right? And do the things that get universities, which are research, right? Teaching isn't really so valued. You don't get, it's research, right? And it's kind of research, publications in journals. It's not doesn't translate easily. And that's the hard work. I think your question is, well, how do we make it? Because we can't expect people to be heroes, right? Academics will follow the incentives, most of them. So a few will stick their necks out, and then very often what happens after they stick their necks out is they burn out. Academics who stuck their necks out at various stages of protest, you learn to reel it in again, I think quite often, right? So what's the kind of story is that what can we do, right? It's that's the challenge, and often we just don't have the capacity. This is one of the things you read about community engagement is the people in the community don't have time, right, to commit. Academics don't have time, so the interventions have to be very carefully designed so that it's something that happens progressively. I think you build towards that, and you don't over-criticize. That's the point I'm making about. So long as we have a movement towards, it sounds like an excuse, but I do think the reality is that we are in an environment where our capacity is quite. Oh, it's Kenneth there. I think I'm done. Thank you.
Let me.
You such strong.
Do you mind just muting
The list.
thanks. Esther. Yeah. Esther and Michael. Yeah. Yeah, let's wrap it up for today. If we want to keep chatting, we'll stick around. Don't worry. Chat a bit longer. But just a couple of things. Just first of all, a huge thanks for the people who came today and for everyone who joined online. It's great to be able to do this again. Roughly speaking, we've got one seminar per month during term time. At least 3 of these are book launches, so we're going to try and get back into that sort of system where we launch books, we invite authors to come. We've got an exciting list of speakers. We're going to put this on the websites. Make sure you've given us your email details if you'd like to be on the mailing list. Next month, April, we'll be communicating the dates. We've got Dr. Mbuso Moyo from FES, who's going to come talk about industrial policy and employment in South Africa. I think that's a particularly relevant topic at the moment. You've probably heard that unemployment is now at a record 35% in South Africa at the narrowest measure. So time to relook at some of the policies, and industrial policies a good place to start. So a huge thanks again to FES for their support over the past 2 years. We worked together during the pandemic to keep the webinars going, and we're excited to see what's possible this year in terms of more blended events like this, and lots of support from FES on the book launches as well. So we hope to see you in April. Get in touch if you're not on our mailing list, and we'll be communicating the schedule for the rest of the year quite soon. So thanks everyone, but mostly a huge thanks to David, Claire, and Kenneth for the interesting paper and the discussion and for taking our questions. So thanks again.
Kenneth wasn't able to join.
Thanks, everyone.
Kenneth was having problems with his internet.
Okay.
Yeah. So thank you, Kenneth.
Yeah. Thanks, Kenneth. It's appreciated. Yeah. Thanks, everyone. Yeah.
Thanks.
And all right, do we go first? Right there.